The signal came from the darkness between stars like a cry for help that nobody wanted to hear. Admiral Lee Tae-min stood in the command center of Earth Defense Station, watching the alien message play for the 5th time that morning, and each time, it made his stomach twist with anger and something deeper that felt like shame. The message was from the Volani Republic, a peaceful bird-like species that lived in the Kepler 442 system almost 300 light-years from Earth, and their world was dying on the screen. A Volani leader with bright blue feathers and large golden eyes spoke in their musical language while the translation scrolled below in cold white text that did not capture the desperation in their voice. "We have held for 37 cycles, but our defenses fail, and the Kreks show no mercy, and they consume worlds and enslave populations, and if anyone receives this, please, we have children here." The recording ended, and Admiral Lee turned to face Captain Park So-young, who commanded the flagship Indomitable, and her face showed the same mix of rage and determination that he felt burning in his chest. "How long since this was sent?" Captain Park asked. Dr. Kim Woo-jin, the chief scientist, looked up from his console with tired eyes that had been studying alien data for weeks and said the signal travel time puts this at about 40 days ago. "Admiral, 40 days meant the Volani had been fighting alone for over a month while their message crawled through space at light speed, hoping someone would care enough to help. The Galactic Council had received the same message, of course, and for 3 weeks they had been talking about it in their great crystal chamber on the neutral world of Harmony Prime. Admiral Lee had watched those debates through the official channels and seen how each species found reasons why they could not help. The aquatic Zephyrians said their ships needed special water systems that could not travel so far from their ocean worlds. Crystalline prisms claimed their energy-based technology would not work properly in that distant system. The insectoid hivers said their fleet was too busy protecting their own borders from pirates. Even the mighty Titanians with their huge war machines said the distance was too great and the risk too high for their slow-moving ships. Every species had an excuse, and Admiral Lee knew what they really meant was that the Volani were not worth the cost. The Volani had no great military to offer as allies, and no rare resources that anyone needed badly enough to fight for, and their homeworld was just another dot of light in a galaxy full of such dots. But humans were different, and Admiral Lee knew this even if the rest of the galaxy did not understand. Yet Earth was classified as a death world in the galactic databases because only the most dangerous and adaptable species could survive on such a hostile planet. Most alien worlds were gentle places with stable weather and friendly environments, where life grew slowly and peacefully over millions of years. Earth was a world of ice ages and volcanic eruptions and asteroid impacts and mass extinctions, where only the strongest and smartest and most stubborn creatures lived long enough to pass on their genes. Humans had evolved from persistence hunters who could chase prey across vast distances until it collapsed from exhaustion, and they had learned to work together in groups to bring down creatures much larger and stronger than themselves. The galaxy saw humans as newcomers who had only joined the Galactic Council 83 years ago, and most species still thought of them as primitive barbarians who were barely civilized enough to be trusted with space travel. What they did not understand was that humans had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to fight impossible odds, and when Admiral Lee walked to the great window that looked out at Earth, floating blue and white in the darkness, and thought about what his species had accomplished in such a short time. They had built cities that reached into the sky, and machines that could think, and weapons that could crack planets, and ships that could cross the galaxy. But more than that, they had learned something that no other species seemed to understand, which was that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hard thing to do. Captain Park moved to stand beside him and said, "What do you think, Admiral?" And her voice was quiet, but he could hear the steel underneath. "I think the Council will keep talking until there is nothing left to save," Admiral Lee said, "and I think that is exactly what they want." Dr. Kim looked up from his console again and said, "Admiral, I have been studying the Kreks communications that we intercepted, and they are not just conquering the Volani system, and they are using it as a staging ground for what Captain Park asked for expansion into this entire sector of the galaxy," Dr. Kim said, "and if they take the Volani worlds, they will have a perfect base to attack at least 6 other systems, including 3 that have Council member species." The room went quiet as everyone realized what this meant. The Kreks were not just destroying one peaceful species, they were preparing 2. destroy many more, and the council was going to let it happen because they could not see past their own borders. Admiral Lee turned away from the window and walked to the communication console where he opened a priority channel to Earth Fleet Command. "This is Admiral Lee Tae-min requesting immediate conference with Fleet Admiral Choi," he said. The response came back in less than a minute, and Fleet Admiral Choi Min-ho appeared on the screen looking tired but alert. "What is your assessment of the Volani situation?" "Admiral Lee, sir. The Council will not act, and every day we wait makes rescue more difficult, and the Kreks are using this as a staging ground for further expansion fleet." Admiral Choi was quiet for a long moment, and then said, "What are you recommending, Admiral?" "I recommend we respond to the distress call, sir, even if the Council refuses to authorize it, especially if the Council refuses to authorize it," Admiral Lee said. Captain Park stepped forward and said, "Sir, if I may, and the humans have been part of the Council for over 80 years, and in all that time we have followed every rule and respected every decision and paid every fee. But we have never been tested," Dr. Kim added, "and the other species still see us as barbarians who got lucky with technology. They think we are soft because we prefer diplomacy," Fleet Admiral Choi said, "and they think we are weak because we have not started any wars." "Admiral." Lee nodded and said, "Sir, the Volani message was not sent to the Council, and it was sent to anyone who would listen, and that includes us." The Fleet Admiral was quiet again, and Admiral Lee could see him thinking through all the implications of what they were discussing. "If we do this alone, we will be acting without Council authorization." Fleet Admiral Choi said, "Yes, sir. And if we succeed, we will have proven that Earth can project military power across hundreds of light years." "Yes, sir. And if we fail, we will have proven that humans make poor decisions and cannot be trusted." With major military operations, Admiral Lee looked at Captain Park and Dr. Kim and saw the same determination in their eyes that he felt in his heart. Sir Admiral Lee said the Volani have children. Fleet Admiral Choi smiled for the first time in the conversation and said, "Admiral Lee, prepare your fleet and you have full authorization for Operation Guardian Angel." Admiral Lee felt something cold and hard settle in his stomach as he realized what they were about to do. They were about to show the galaxy what humans were really capable of when someone threatened innocent people. "Sir, how large a force are we authorized to deploy?" Fleet Admiral Choi looked directly into the camera and said, "Admiral Lee, you are authorized to deploy whatever force you deem necessary to ensure mission success." Admiral Lee understood and said, "Thank you, sir." The connection ended and Captain Park looked at him with raised eyebrows. "So, Admiral, what are your orders?" Admiral Lee turned to Dr. Kim and said, "Doctor, I want you to prepare a complete tactical analysis of the Kreks fleet and their capabilities." "Yes, sir." Then he turned to Captain Park and said, "Captain, I want you to prepare the Indomitable for immediate departure." "Where are we going, Admiral?" Admiral Lee smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "We are going to answer a distress call, Captain, and we are going to remind the galaxy why Earth is classified as a death world." The mobilization began 12 hours after Admiral Lee received authorization, and what started as a rescue mission quickly became something that made the entire galaxy hold its breath. Captain Jang Hyun-woo was eating breakfast in his quarters aboard the assault carrier Cerberus when the alert came through, and he nearly choked on his coffee when he read the deployment orders. "All fleet units report for immediate mobilization under Operation Guardian Angel and Destination, Classified, and Mission. Priority Alpha 1." Alpha 1 meant war, and Captain Jang had never seen an Alpha 1 alert in his 15 years of service. He reached his bridge in 4 minutes and found his crew already at their stations because they had all heard the same alert, and they all knew what it meant. Sir Lieutenant Commander Oh Subin said from the navigation station, "We are receiving new orders from Fleet Command. Put them on screen," Captain Jang said. The orders appeared, and Captain Jang felt his heart rate increase. As he read them, the Cerberus was ordered to load the entire 1st Orbital Drop Regiment, along with their combat mechs and heavy equipment, and prepare for extended combat operations in hostile territory. This was not a training exercise or a patrol mission, and this was preparation for the kind of fighting that humans had not done since the border wars 40 years ago. Major Lim Ji-yoon arrived on the bridge 20 minutes later, looking grim and determined. "Captain," she said, "my regiment is ready for loading, but I need to know what we are up against." Captain Jang looked at her and said, "Major, we are going to rescue a species called the Villani from something called the Krex Major." Lim nodded and said, "And the Krex are hostile." "Very hostile, Captain," Jang said. "And according to intelligence, they have been wiping out entire civilizations." Major Lim smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made enemies reconsider their life choices. "Good," she said. "My troops have been getting soft with all this peacekeeping." Work, meanwhile, across the solar system, every human military base was receiving similar orders, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Chief Engineer Kang Dong-soo was pulled out of a design meeting where he had been working on new shield generators and told to report to the secret shipyard at Titan Station. When he arrived, he found teams of workers swarming over a massive ship that he had helped design but never expected to see completed. The Ragnarok was a siege dreadnought built in complete secrecy over the past 8 years, and it was designed for one purpose, which was to destroy things that normal weapons could not touch. The ship was over 2 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to crack the surface of a small moon, and it had been built because human military planners believed that someday they would face an enemy that could only be stopped with overwhelming force. Chief Engineer Kang walked through the ship, checking systems that he had only seen in blueprints, and found everything working perfectly. The main guns were charged, and the armor was sealed, and the engines were ready to push this monster across hundreds of light years to deliver its deadly message. At Earth Fleet Command, Admiral Lee stood in the war room watching displays that showed the gathering of the largest human military force since the Unification Wars. The numbers were staggering, and 87 ships of various classes were being prepared for immediate departure. 47 warships ranging from fast destroyers to heavy battleships, 12 assault carriers packed with drop troops and combat vehicles, 23 support vessels including mobile repair stations and supply ships, 3 stealth frigates for reconnaissance and infiltration, 1 experimental siege dreadnought that officially did not exist, and 1 command ship that would coordinate the largest military operation in human space. Faring history, Dr. Kim Woo-jin worked frantically to analyze every piece of intelligence about the Krex that Earth had managed to gather over the years. The Krex were reptilian humanoids about 3 meters tall with thick scales and powerful claws, and they had built an empire by conquering weaker species. Their military doctrine was simple and brutal, and they overwhelmed enemy defenses with massive numbers and superior firepower, and then landed troops to eliminate any survivors. They had never faced serious resistance because most species in the galaxy preferred to surrender rather than fight a hopeless battle. What Dr. Kim found disturbing was that the Krex seemed to enjoy the process of conquest, and their communications suggested that they took pleasure in breaking the will of their enemies. They were not just expanding their territory. They were spreading fear and despair across entire sectors of space. Captain Park, so young, spent 18 hours straight preparing the Indomitable for combat operations, and every system was checked and double-checked. And triple-checked human ships were built differently than the vessels used by other species, and where alien ships prioritized speed and efficiency, human ships prioritized survival. The Indomitable had armor plating that was 3 times thicker than standard council specifications, and it had backup systems for the backup systems. If the main engines failed, the secondary engines could still push the ship at 60% of normal speed, and if those failed, the emergency engines could get them home. If the main weapons failed, the secondary batteries could still fight a full battle, and if those failed, every human ship carried enough small arms to outfit a planetary invasion force. This redundancy made human ships heavier and slower than their alien counterparts, but it also made them nearly impossible to stop once they decided to fight. The loading process took 3 days, and during that time, the galaxy began to notice that something unusual was happening in the Sol system monitoring. Stations detected massive energy signatures as human ships powered up their main drives. Communication intercepts revealed military traffic on frequencies that had been quiet for decades. Long-range sensors picked up formations of ships moving in, patterns that suggested combat training. The Galactic Council sent an official inquiry asking about the unusual military activity. Admiral Lee sent back a one-line response that said, "Earth Defense Forces are conducting routine training exercises." This was technically true, because the human fleet was training, but they were training for combat operations, against a specific enemy in a specific location. What Admiral Lee did not mention was that this training would conclude with the deployment of the largest human war fleet in history. Fleet Admiral Choi arrived at the command ship personally to review the final preparations, and he brought with him orders that had been sealed until the moment of departure. Admiral Lee opened the orders in the presence of his senior staff and read them aloud to Admiral Lee Tae-min, commanding Task Force Guardian from Fleet Admiral Choi Min-ho. You are hereby authorized to use any and all necessary force to complete your mission, and you have full discretionary authority over rules of engagement. Be advised that Earth government has declared the rescue of Volani civilians to be a matter of vital human interest. Be further advised that any interference with this mission by hostile forces will be considered an act of war against Earth. The mission parameters are as follows, and arrive at Volani system and eliminate Krek's military presence and establish security for civilian evacuation and demonstrate human commitment to protecting innocent life throughout. The Galaxy Admiral Lee looked up at his staff and saw expressions ranging from excitement to concern. Captain Park said, "Admiral, those are very broad orders." "Yes, they are," Admiral Lee replied. "And that means Earth government wants us to succeed regardless." Of course, Dr. Kim cleared his throat and said, "Admiral, I should point out that we will be vastly outnumbered. The latest intelligence suggests the Kreks have over 200 ships in the Volani system." Major Lim stepped forward and said with respect, "Doctor, numbers do not tell the whole story. The Kreks fight like predators, and they expect their prey to run or surrender, and they have never faced an enemy that hunts them back." Chief Engineer Kang nodded and said, "Our ships are built for sustained combat, and theirs are built for quick victories if we can force them into a long fight. They will discover that human engineering is superior to Krek's arrogance." Captain Jang added, "And my troops are trained for boarding actions and close combat, and from what I have read, the Kreks prefer to avoid hand-to-hand fighting." Admiral Lee listened to his officers and felt pride in their confidence and their understanding of what they were about to attempt. "We are not just going to rescue the Volani," he said. "We are going to send a message to every aggressive species in the galaxy. The message is simple, and if you threaten innocent people, humans will come for you, and when we come, we will not stop until you are no longer a threat." The final preparations took another day, and then the human fleet began its departure from Sol's system. The ships left in small groups over several hours to avoid attracting too much attention from galactic observers. The last ship to depart was the command vessel with Admiral Lee aboard. And as Earth fell away behind them, he opened a communication channel to all ships. "This is Admiral Lee to all units, and we are embarking on a mission that will define humanity's role in galactic affairs for generations to come." The Volani called for help, and we answered. And now we will show the galaxy what humans do when innocent people are threatened. We fight. The fleet jumped to hyperspace and began the long journey to Kepler 442, while behind them the galaxy slowly began to realize that the humans were not conducting training exercises, they were going to war. The journey to Kepler 442 took 6 weeks through hyperspace, and during that time, the human fleet moved like nothing the galaxy had ever seen before. Captain Baek Jun Seo commanded the stealth frigate Shadow, and his job was to scout ahead of the main fleet to gather intelligence without being detected. The Shadow was one of 3 stealth ships that had been built using technology that humans had developed in complete secrecy. And even the Galactic Council did not know these ships existed. Captain Baek had spent 10 years learning how to make his ship invisible to every known sensor type, and he was very good at his job. 2 weeks into the journey, he took the Shadow out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, and what he found made his blood run cold. The Krek's fleet was even larger than intelligence had estimated, and over 300 ships surrounded the Volani homeworld like a swarm of metal wasps. Captain Baek watched through his sensors as Krek's bombardment ships fired plasma cannons at the planet's surface, and each blast was powerful enough to level a city block. The Volani orbital defenses had been destroyed weeks ago, and now the planet was defenseless against the constant rain of fire from above Krek's troop transports, descended to the surface in waves, and each transport carried hundreds of soldiers to hunt down any survivors who might be hiding in the ruins. Captain Baek recorded everything and transmitted the data back to Admiral Lee using quantum communication that could not be intercepted. The intelligence package included detailed scans of every Krex ship and their positions and movement patterns and weapon signatures. What Captain Bayek found most disturbing was that the Krex were not in any hurry to finish their conquest. They were taking their time and enjoying the process of slowly destroying everything the Volani had built over thousands of years. Intercepted communications revealed that Krex commanders were competing to see who could cause the most destruction, and they were keeping score. Like it was some kind of game. Admiral Lee received the intelligence report while the human fleet was still 3 weeks away from the target system. He called a meeting of all senior officers using secure holographic communication that allowed everyone to participate, even though they were spread across dozens of ships. The holographic conference room appeared to be aboard the flagship, but actually each officer was standing in their own ship. While their image was projected to the others, Dr. Kim presented the intelligence analysis, and his voice was steady, but everyone could hear the anger underneath. The Krex have 287 ships of various classes, he said, and they are arranged in 3 defensive shells around the planet. The outer shell consists of patrol ships and scouts, and the middle shell has their main battle fleet, and the inner shell contains bombardment ships and troop transports. Captain Park studied the tactical display and said they are not expecting an attack, and their formation is designed to prevent escape, not to repel invasion. Major Lim looked at the orbital bombardment data and said how many Volani are left. Dr. Kim checked his reports and said, based on the bombardment pattern and the size of their cities, we estimate that less than 10% of the population survived the initial assault. That means there are still several million civilians on the planet, but they are scattered and hiding in underground shelters. Captain Zhang asked how long before the Krex finished them off. Dr. Kim was quiet for a moment and then said at their current rate of bombardment and ground operations, perhaps 2 more weeks. The holographic conference room went silent as everyone realized they were not just racing to rescue the Volani, they were racing to prevent a complete genocide. Admiral Lee looked at each of his officers and said, "Recommendations." Captain Bayek spoke first and said, "Admiral, the Krex are overconfident, and they have no rear guard and no scouts watching the outer system. If we approach from the direction of the gas giant, we can get within striking distance before they detect us." Chief Engineer Kang added, "And their ships are built for intimidation, not for sustained combat, and their armor is thin, and their weapons are designed for bombardment, not ship-to-ship fighting." Major Lim said, "My analysis of their ground forces suggests they rely on shock tactics and overwhelming numbers, and they have never faced an enemy that fights back effectively." Captain Park said, "Admiral, I recommend we abandon standard fleet tactics entirely." "What do you mean, Captain?" "Sir, we should not fight them like a normal space battle, and we should hunt them." Admiral Lee considered this and said, "Explain." Captain Park activated a tactical display and began moving ship icons around the holographic representation of the Krex fleet. The Krex expect their enemies to either surrender immediately or charge directly at their strongest positions, she said. "Instead, we hit them from multiple directions simultaneously, and we target their command ships first to disrupt their coordination. We use our stealth frigates to eliminate their scouts and observation posts, and then we bring in the main fleet from 7 different vectors. Each attack group has a specific mission, and the goal is not to destroy their entire fleet, but to cause so much confusion that they cannot respond effectively." Dr. Kim looked at the plan and said, "Captain, this is not a battle strategy. This is a hunting strategy." "Exactly," Captain Park said, "and humans are persistence hunters, and we do not give up until our prey is dead." Admiral Lee studied the tactical display for several minutes while his officers waited for his decision. The plan was extremely risky because it required splitting the human fleet into small groups that would be vulnerable if the Krex managed to coordinate their response, but it also played to human strengths and ignored human weaknesses, and most importantly, it gave them the best chance of saving Volani lives. Admiral Lee made his decision and said, "Captain Park, your plan is approved with modifications." He began highlighting different areas of the tactical display and said, "We will need to position our forces very carefully. To make this work, Captain Bayek, your stealth ships will eliminate their outer pickets, starting exactly 4 hours before the main attack. Chief Engineer Kang, the Ragnarok, will approach from the far side of the gas giant and target their flagship when it reaches optimal firing position. Major Lim, Your assault carriers will launch boarding parties against their command ships the moment their shields go down, Captain. Jang, prepare your drop troops for immediate planetary assault once we secure orbital supremacy. Dr. Kim, I want continuous analysis of their communications during the battle, and if they try to coordinate a response, I want to know about it immediately. Captain Park, you will command the central attack group, and your job is to keep their attention while the other groups get into position. The meeting continued for 3 hours as they refined every detail of the attack plan, and when it was finished, Admiral Lee looked at his officers with pride. You have just planned the most complex military operation in human history, he said, and if it works, we will save millions of lives and send a message that will be heard across the entire galaxy. If it fails, we will all die very far from home. Captain Park smiled and said, Admiral, my crew did not join the military to die of old age. Major Lim nodded and said, my troops are ready to show the galaxy what humans do to bullies. Captain Jang added, and the Kreks are about to learn why Earth is classified as a death world, Duct. Kim looked up from his analysis and said, Admiral, there is one more thing you should know. What is it, Doctor? The Kreks have been broadcasting their conquest of the Vellani homeworld to their entire empire, and they are using it as propaganda to intimidate other species. If we defeat them here, the psychological impact will be enormous. Admiral Lee considered this and said, Doctor, that is exactly what we want. For too long, the galaxy has seen humans as newcomers who got lucky with technology, and now they will see us as we really are. The conference ended, and each officer returned to their ships to prepare for battle. 3 weeks later, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system and began the final approach to the target captain. Bayek took the shadow in first and confirmed that the Kreks fleet was still in position around the dying planet. The bombardment had continued and whole continents were now burning, but the stealth frigate detected energy signatures that suggested Vellani survivors were still alive in underground shelters. Admiral Lee opened a fleet-wide communication channel and said, all units, this is Guardian Actual, and we are now in hostile territory. Remember that we are not here to win a glorious victory, and we are here to save innocent lives and stop a genocide. The Kreks have had their way with the galaxy for too long, and today that ends. Execute Operation Guardian Angel, and let them know that humans have arrived. The Battle of Kepler 442 began at exactly 0347 hours ship time, when Captain Bayek and his stealth frigates started eliminating Krek scout ships one by one. The shadow moved through the outer asteroid belt like a ghost, and its first target was a Kreks patrol corvette that was monitoring the approaches to the inner system. Captain Bayek waited until the corvette was isolated from its companions and then fired a single antimatter torpedo that vaporized the enemy ship in a burst of pure energy. The Kreks never even knew they were under attack. Similar scenes played out across the outer system as human stealth ships systematically destroyed every Kreks observation post and patrol vessel. Chief Petty Officer Nam Ki-tae monitored the tactical display from his position aboard the Shadow and watched enemy contacts disappear one after another. Sir, he said to Captain Bayek, that is the last of their outer pickets, and the main fleet still shows no sign of alert. Good. Captain Bayek replied and signaled Admiral Lee that Phase 1 is complete. 12 light minutes away, Admiral Lee received the message aboard his flagship and opened a fleet-wide communication channel, all units. This is Guardian Actual and Phase 1 complete and execute Phase 2. The human fleet had been waiting in 7 different staging areas throughout the outer system, and now they began their coordinated approach to the Kreks main fleet. Rear Admiral Song Jae-won commanded the left flank attack group consisting of 2 heavy cruisers and 4 destroyers. His ships had been hiding behind the largest of the system's gas giants, and now they accelerated toward the Kreks fleet at maximum military power. Admiral Song watched his tactical display as the range closed and said to his bridge crew, remember that we are the diversion, and our job is to make them think we are the main attack. His ships dropped out of stealth at exactly the right moment and immediately opened fire on the nearest Kreks vessels. The enemy responded exactly as predicted, and began turning their fleet to face what they thought was a desperate frontal assault by a small group of human ships. Meanwhile, Captain Park brought the main human battle group directly through the heart of the Kreks formation, from a completely different direction. The Indomitable led 6 other heavy warships in a charge that caught the Kreks completely off guard. Captain Park stood on her bridge watching enemy ships scramble to respond to threats coming from multiple directions. At once, target their command ship, she ordered, and fire everything we have. The Indomitable's main guns spoke with voices of thunder and antimatter. Warheads tore through Krek's shields like they were made of paper. The enemy flagship tried to turn and present its heavy armor, but human targeting systems were faster and more accurate than anything the Kreks had ever faced. 3 direct hits in rapid succession, and the Krek's command ship broke apart in a series of explosions that lit up the darkness of space. But the real surprise was yet to come. Major Lim watched from the bridge of the assault carrier Cerberus as her ship approached a cluster of Krek's heavy cruisers. The enemy ships were firing everything they had at Captain Park's battle group, and had no idea that a human assault carrier was approaching from their blind side launch. All assault pods Major Lim ordered. The Cerberus opened its launch bays, and dozens of armored pods shot out toward the Krek's ships. Each pod contained a full squad of human Marines equipped with powered armor and weapons designed for close quarters combat. The pods punched through Krek's hull armor like bullets through cardboard and deposited their deadly cargo directly into enemy ships. What happened next shocked even the human commanders who had planned the operation. Krek's warriors were large and strong and heavily armed, but they had never faced enemies like human Marines in combat. Sergeant Ko Min-seok led his squad through the corridors of a Krek's battleship and found that the enemy soldiers were not prepared for the kind of fighting that humans had learned on Earth. The Kreks expected their size and strength to intimidate their opponents, but humans had evolved from creatures that hunted, animals much larger than themselves. When a 3-meter-tall Krek's warrior charged at Sergeant Ko with claws extended, the human Marine simply stepped aside and put 3 plasma bolts through the alien's center of mass. Human Marines moved through Krek's ships like wolves through a flock of sheep, and within minutes they had seized control of the enemy bridges and engineering sections. The psychological impact on the Krek's fleet was devastating. Ships that had been fighting effectively suddenly went silent as their crews realized that humans were loose inside their vessels. Dr. Kim monitored Krek's communications from his position aboard the flagship and watched their coordination collapse in real time. Admiral, he reported, their fleet commanders are trying to regain control, but our boarding parties have captured or destroyed most of their senior officers. The enemy ships are operating independently now, and they cannot coordinate their response. Admiral Lee smiled grimly and said, "Then it is time for the final phase," and signaled the Ragnarok 2 hours earlier. Chief Engineer Kang had guided the massive siege dreadnought into position behind the gas giant, where it had been waiting for this moment. The Ragnarok was the most powerful warship ever built by humans, and its main weapon was designed to crack the surface of fortified worlds. Now, Chief Engineer Kang targeted the largest concentration of Krek's ships and prepared to demonstrate the full power of human military engineering. Siege cannon charged for 30 seconds, and during that time, every sensor in the system detected the massive energy buildup. When it fired, the beam of concentrated antimatter was visible from the planet's surface. The target was a Krek's super dreadnought that served as the fleet's secondary command ship. The antimatter beam struck the enemy vessel amidships, and the entire 2-kilometer-long warship simply ceased to exist. Where there had been a mighty battleship, there was now only expanding plasma and debris. The effect on Krek's morale was immediate and catastrophic. Dr. Kim reported that enemy communications were filled with panic and confusion as Krek's captains tried to understand how their most powerful ship had been destroyed in a single shot. Many Krek's vessels began to withdraw from the battle, and some even attempted to flee the system entirely. But Admiral Lee was not finished. Captain An Ye-jin led a squadron of human fighters in an attack on the Krek's bombardment ships that had been destroying the planet's surface. Her pilots flew through the chaos of the main battle and targeted the ships that were still firing on Vellani civilians. The bombardment ships were large and slow and designed to attack planets, not to fight enemy. Fighters Captain An's squadron destroyed 12 bombardment ships in 20 minutes and finally ended the rain of fire that had been falling on the Vellani homeworld. The tide of battle had turned completely. What had begun as a Krek's massacre of helpless civilians had become a human demonstration of military superiority. Krek's ships that had seemed invincible were burning wrecks floating in space. Krek's warriors who had terrorized entire worlds were being systematically defeated by human Marines. Legendary Krex fleet that had conquered 17 star systems was breaking apart under the relentless pressure of human tactics. Admiral Lee watched the tactical display as more and more Krex ships either surrendered or attempted to flee some enemy. Vessels managed to escape into hyperspace, but most were too damaged or too demoralized to fight effectively. The battle was essentially over, but Admiral Lee had one more message to send. He opened a communication channel to the surviving Krex ships and spoke in their own language thanks to translation software that Dr. Kim had prepared. "This is Admiral Lee Tae-min of the Human Defense Force," he said, "and you came here to destroy innocent people, and now you know what happens when humans object to genocide. Those of you who survive will carry this message back to your empire, and Earth is watching, and if you threaten civilians again, we will come for you. And next time, we will not be so merciful." The remaining Krex ships fled the system in complete disorder, leaving behind the wreckage of what had once been considered one of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy as the immediate threat ended. Admiral Lee turned his attention to the real mission, which was saving the Volani survivors captain. Park brought the Indomitable into orbit around the devastated planet and began coordinating rescue operations. Medical ships descended to the surface to search for survivors, while engineering vessels started helping to repair damaged shelters. Dr. Kim analyzed the planetary scans and reported that approximately 4 million Volani had survived the bombardment by hiding in deep underground facilities. It would take weeks to evacuate them all, but the immediate danger was over. Major Lim stood on the bridge of her assault carrier and watched human rescue teams working on the planet's surface. "We did it," she said quietly, "and we actually did it." Captain Zhang nodded and said yes, but the real question is what happens next. Admiral Lee heard their conversation and said what happens next is that the galaxy learns what humans are really capable of when innocent people are threatened. The Battle of Kepler 442 was over, but its consequences would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. The rescue of the Volani survivors took 3 weeks, and during that time the galaxy watched in stunned silence as humans demonstrated capabilities that no one had suspected they possessed. Ambassador Veltar was one of the first Volani leaders, brought aboard the human medical ship Mercy, and when he saw Captain Park waiting to greet him, he fell to his knees and wept. "We thought we were forgotten," he said in broken standard galactic, "and we thought the galaxy had abandoned us to die, Captain." Park helped him to his feet and said, "Ambassador, humanity does not abandon people who call for help." The medical teams worked around the clock to treat Volani wounded, and Dr. Kim coordinated with Volani scientists to ensure that the refugees received proper care. What amazed the medical staff was how quickly the Volani recovered once they realized they were truly safe. These were a people who had endured weeks of constant bombardment and the knowledge that their entire civilization was being destroyed piece by piece, but they had never given up hope that someone would answer their distress call. The evacuation proceeded with typical human efficiency, and engineering vessels helped repair underground shelters, while transport ships carried refugees to temporary camps on nearby moons. Admiral Lee personally visited the planet's surface to see the damage that the Krex had inflicted, and what he found made him more determined than ever to ensure this never happened again. Entire cities had been reduced to slag, and forests that had grown for thousands of years were now radioactive wastelands. The Krex had not been content with military conquest. They had tried to erase every trace of Volani civilization, but they had failed because humans had arrived in time to save millions of lives and preserve the future of an entire species. Meanwhile, the political consequences of the battle were spreading throughout the galaxy like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. The Galactic Council called an emergency session to discuss what they termed the unauthorized military action by Earth forces. Chancellor Ri Su-jin represented humanity at the council meeting, and she faced a chamber full of alien diplomats who were struggling to understand what had just happened. The aquatic Zephyrian ambassador spoke first and said the humans have acted without council authorization, and this sets a dangerous precedent for unilateral military action. The crystalline prism representative added that Earth forces used weapons of unprecedented destructive power, and this threatens the balance of galactic politics. Chancellor Ri listened politely to their concerns and then stood to address the council-honored delegates. She said humanity received a distress call from innocent civilians who were being systematically murdered, and we responded. The council debated for weeks while people died, and when it became clear that no action would be taken, we acted alone. The Zephyrian ambassador protested and said the proper procedure is to work through established diplomatic channels, Chancellor. Ree smiled coldly and said, Ambassador, tell that to the 4 million Villani who are alive today. Because humans ignored proper procedure. The council chamber erupted in angry voices as delegates argued about jurisdiction and protocol and the proper limits of military intervention. But Chancellor Ree was not finished. She activated a holographic display that showed footage from the battle and the rescue operations. This is what happens when humans decide that innocent lives matter more than political convenience, she said. The Krex fleet that terrorized this entire sector of space no longer exists, and the genocide they were committing has been stopped. Species that threaten civilians should consider this a warning. The display showed the destruction of the Krex super dreadnought, and several council members visibly flinched at the sheer scale of the destruction. The insectoid Hiver representative spoke up and said, humanity has revealed military capabilities that were previously unknown, and this information should have been shared with the council. Chancellor Ree turned to face the Hiver and said humanity has always been transparent about our defensive capabilities, and what you saw was not a secret weapon, but simply human determination applied to a just cause. The Titanian ambassador asked what assurance the council had that Earth would not use this military power for conquest. Chancellor Ree looked around the chamber and said the same assurance you have always had, which is that humans prefer peace but will fight when necessary to protect the innocent. The debate continued for hours, but the outcome was already clear. Humanity had demonstrated that they possessed both the capability and the will to project military power across hundreds of light years. More importantly, they had shown that they would act unilaterally when they believed innocent lives were at stake. 3 species formally requested defense treaties with Earth within days of the battle. The peaceful Eldari, who had been threatened by pirates for years, asked for human patrol ships to protect their trade routes. The scholarly Nexians requested human advisors to help them develop better defensive systems. The agricultural gardeners offered exclusive trade agreements in exchange for military protection. But the most significant response came from the Krex Empire itself. High Commander Thexmore was the senior Krex military leader who had survived the battle, and his report to the Krex High Council became one of the most important documents in galactic military history. The humans do not fight as we understand warfare, he wrote, and they do not seek glorious victory or territorial conquest. They fight to ensure that their enemies cannot threaten others, and this makes them far more dangerous than any conventional military force. We attacked what we believed to be soft prey and discovered apex predators who had been concealing their true nature. The Krex fleet that conquered 17 worlds was destroyed not by superior numbers or advanced technology, but by tactical thinking that we could not comprehend. The humans hunt like the persistence predators they evolved from, and they do not stop until their prey is dead high. Commander Thexmore's report was intercepted by Council intelligence services, and copies were secretly distributed to military planners throughout the galaxy. The effect was immediate and profound. 7 aggressive species that had been planning expansion campaigns quietly canceled their operations. The pirate raids that had plagued the Outer Rim decreased by 60% as raiders decided that the potential consequences were not worth the risk. Even established empires began reassessing their military doctrines to account for the possibility that humans might object to their actions. Dr. Kim completed his analysis of the battle and submitted a report that became required. Reading at military academies across known space humans are unique among galactic species, he wrote, because they combine technological capability with moral conviction. They do not fight for territory or resources or political advantage, and they fight to protect principles that they consider more important than their own safety. This combination of advanced military capability and moral motivation makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy to anyone who threatens innocent life. Admiral Lee returned to Earth as a hero, but his final report to the Defense Ministry contained a sobering warning. We succeeded because the Krex underestimated us, he wrote, and that advantage will not last. Word of our capabilities is spreading throughout the galaxy, and future enemies will be better prepared. If we are to serve as protectors of the innocent, We must be ready for opponents who understand what we are capable of. The human fleet was upgraded and expanded based on lessons learned from the battle. New ships incorporated improved stealth technology, and more powerful weapons training programs were developed to prepare human forces for the kind of multi-vector attacks that had proven so effective against the Kreks. But the most important change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity. No longer were humans seen as primitive newcomers who had gotten lucky with technology. They were now recognized as a major military power with the capability and willingness to intervene anywhere in. The Galaxy Ambassador Veltar addressed the Galactic Council 6 months after his rescue, and his words became part of the official record. "My people called into the void when death came for us," he said, and the Deathworlders answered, not for profit, or territory or political advantage, but because it was right. The galaxy is a safer place because humans exist, and any species that threatens innocent life should remember what happened at Kepler 442. Chancellor Ree stood to deliver humanity's final statement to the Council. "Earth did not seek the role of galactic protector," she said, "but we accept the responsibility that comes with our capabilities. To those who would harm the innocent, know that we are listening, and if you force us to come looking for you, we will find you. And when we do, you will discover why Earth is classified as a death world." The session ended in silence, as delegates contemplated a galaxy where the most dangerous predators had appointed themselves guardians of the weak-in. Distant systems that had never heard of Earth species began including a new factor in their strategic planning. What if the Deathworlders come? The question changed everything.